Tonight we're in Weston-super-Mare. Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Matt Hancock, Government Health Secretary, one of the key people involved in decision-making at the highest level during this coronavirus crisis. The Labour Mayor of Greater Manchester and former Health Secretary under Gordon Brown during the swine flu epidemic, Andy Burnham. Tom Solomon, Doctor and Director of the UK's Emerging Infections Research Unit at Liverpool University. Francis O'Grady, General Secretary of the Trades Union Congress, the TUC. And Michelin-starred chef, television presenter and owner of several restaurants, Angela Hartnett. Now, we're doing a very different programme tonight on Question Time for obvious reasons. For the first time in the history of Question Time, there is no studio audience. But we will be hearing from the people of Weston-super-Mare. They have very kindly recorded some questions for us, and we're going to play them in via video link. But as we are live, we also want to hear from you. So contact us in the usual way on Twitter, on social media, at BBC Question Time, and I will feed in as many questions as I can to our panel, suitably distanced as we go through the hour. So let's hear our first question tonight, which is from local doctor Jess Elliott.
Hi, my name's Jess Elliott, and I'm a junior doctor working in Weston-super-Mare. The situation with the coronavirus is a worrying time for us all, and not least us working in what really are unprecedented circumstances for the health service. Many junior doctors are frightened that we will be in the same position as Italy in a few weeks' time with the coronavirus pandemic. How are you going to ration ventilators and other vital equipment for patients and protective equipment for staff when the NHS becomes overwhelmed?
Right, well, Matt, since we've got you here,
yes.
Let's start with you. Clearly, that is an issue about ventilators as well as protective equipment.
Yes.
There doesn't appear there's enough of it at the moment. What's being done about that?
Well, this is incredibly important. I mean, the frontline staff of the NHS do an amazing job all of the time, but in the coming weeks, they'll be called on for a heroic effort. So I know that there are concerns on the front line around making sure that the protective equipment keeps coming.
So, Tom, what's your response to what Jess had to say and what Matt's saying?
Yeah, I think the important point about ventilators are very important. There are plans to make more, as we've just heard about. It may be that we have to be a little bit innovative and creative, given the nature of this emergency which we're facing. And I've worked in parts of the world like Southeast Asia and Africa, where there are ventilators which are made of a different spec and work in a different way. And it may be that we will use ventilators of that sort so that we can use more quickly. And even in Canada, they're talking about using ventilators where instead of one supporting respiration for one person, you can effectively support several people, up to 9 people, as long as they have a similar need in terms of support.
So do you feel confident we'll have enough of them? I
feel certainly the numbers of ventilators are going up dramatically, but also the numbers of patients are going up. And you know, we are in uncertain territory, so obviously there is a race is on, but I'm confident that we're doing everything we can to produce enough ventilators in time. In Liverpool, where I'm working, I came from the hospital this morning where I work, and at the moment we have 2 ventilated patients, but we actually have capacity for about 20 ventilated patients. So depending on where you are in the country, clearly in London the strain is greater, so that's where the need for the new ventilators will be first.
And Andy, what's your response to hearing, we've had so many doctors saying that they don't feel they have enough equipment and they feel that they're putting their own lives at risk, and Matt's saying that he's on the way to sorting that.
Yeah, you've got to feel, haven't you, for Jess and her colleagues right now. But I remember hearing it in the summer of 2009 when I was dealing with swine flu. Now, nowhere near as serious as this current situation, but serious nonetheless.
Let me just put another, sorry Andy, let me just put another question in that's come in, because I'm going to try as much as I can to get questions in from the audience, given that it's virtual. This is a question from Louisa. When will frontline NHS staff be tested in England? They are already, as I understand it, being tested in Wales and Scotland, but not comprehensively in England, particularly those having to isolate due to illness. My husband and London intensive care unit doctors stuck at home due to possible coronavirus symptoms. Could be flu. He could return to work sooner if he knew, but he can't afford the private test. Now, we've heard the WHO, the World Health Organization, saying test, test. I mean, Tom, what's your view on this? Do you think enough testing is being done among NHS workers?
I think it's critical to test NHS workers. I mean, it's critical to test everybody if we can, and the number of tests that are becoming available are going up. So again, it's these two curves. At the moment, the number of cases is greater than our ability to test, but the testing ability is ramping up. And again, we want the testing ability to overtake the number of cases. But given that at the moment we can't test everybody for the virus, then the priority has to be, first of all, the patients, and that's happening now. And then the second priority, I think, has to be healthcare workers, because at the moment, if somebody, if I have a cough, then I have to go and isolate myself at home for 7 days, and then I will go back to work, and we won't know whether I had coronavirus or not. I might then have another cough a week later, and I'd have to go off again for 7 days.
So do you think we should have started testing sooner?
I think we started testing incredibly quickly. I mean, the minute the Chinese released the information about the genetic information of this virus, Public Health England created a test as soon as they possibly could. Yeah. And then the issue is about scaling that test up. Okay. And when we had 5-10 cases in January, then I think if somebody had said, look, you need to make hundreds of thousands of tests, that would have seemed unsensible, because you just don't know at the start of now.
I mean, I can see, Frances, I know this is you are a specialist in infectious diseases, but you're not agreeing, Frances.
And I'm not an expert on public health, but it seems to me that planning for a pandemic was something that all of our authorities could and should have been doing, were expected to do. And it's the scale issue, isn't it? Because, again, let's be honest about this. Health staff and indeed staff in social care are putting their health on the line for us. And it seems to me that the least they deserve is to get tests, and also because that's the best way we can deliver the service, so that we can get people back to work quickly if it's negative.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think, as we've heard, we now have a Department of Health and Social Care. This is one team of workers, and so testing, I think, of key workers goes across the board.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I chaired the first meeting yesterday of the Greater Manchester COVID committee, and I put the call out before I went, what are the issues that you think aren't getting sufficient attention that need to be put up the priority list, and testing of NHS staff and indeed social care staff was the issue that came back.
I mean, NHS staff clearly don't feel it's happening fast enough.
No, they don't.
From what we're seeing it, they're tweeting, they're putting in, there's pieces in the paper.
This was an area that we
focused
on a lot in 2009, and I know it was part of the pandemic plan. But I think when there was this sort of feeling about, we're going for a kind of more kind of herd immunity approach, whether the eye was taken off the ball of testing a little bit, I don't know, Matt may say something different. What I heard today from a very senior manager in the National Health Service was that there is a lot of scepticism in the system, about 25,000 tests per day. And I just would like to hear from the Secretary of State tonight about when could that be delivered, because people are saying they can't see how that can be delivered anytime soon, because it requires standing down screening capacity and freeing up lab capacity in other parts of the NHS. And I think people are struggling to see when that will come through. So that is a key issue for people, like the masks. People want to know exactly when they'll have this kind of reassurance. So if we could address that, that would be.
So when will we see?
Yeah, well, I've been buying tests today. I mean, that's what I've been spending most of my day on today. Tom's absolutely right. Public Health England came out with the first test of this within days of the viral code being made public. OK, I'm going to take a slightly different tack on the subject just for a moment. I want to hear from another of our people from Weston-super-Mare, Nigel Reasons, who owns a shop making blinds in the area.
As a small business owner who employs 9 people, I am concerned about the future of the business. There are many services such as ours where work is in the customer's home. With increased self-isolation, we will be unable to complete existing contracts for some time and unable to plan future work. This means cash flow is poor, my business interruption insurance does not seem to cover me, and yet my moral obligation is to pay my staff and maintain my business. How are the government proposing to help companies like mine? 1 month's payroll would exceed a £10,000 grant.
Right, so that's Nigel there from Weston-super-Mare. Andrew, I want to come to you, because this is something, as an owner of restaurants, this is something you have to deal with right now. So what have you been doing? What have you been saying to your workers?
We, unfortunately, along with many fellow restaurateurs, and I can only speak from London, we've closed. We've actually shut our restaurants. Last night was the last service. That's 4 restaurants I have.
Businesses need money and they need it, well, they needed it today, but it's going to have to be tomorrow. But it should come with a condition that the money is used to pay staff and keep them on. Gordon Brown was making this point incredibly powerfully on the radio today, because if we keep businesses like Angela's afloat and we keep staff in position, this is the crucial point, Fiona. It will help people now to do the right thing and follow the government's advice, but crucially, it will make the recovery easier after all this is over, because we'll have businesses that are there, staff that are there, ready to go. And the government needs to act on this, Matt, tomorrow. It needs to increase statutory sick pay, as you just acknowledged yourself. It needs to remove the restrictions on job seekers' allowance, increase universal credit, guarantee people's wages with a government contribution to those wages, help self-employed people more than saying apply for universal credit. It needs to do all of these things tomorrow, because that is going to help us in the long term recover from this, not just the health crisis, but the economic crisis as well.
Let's just hear, just quickly, because it plays into that point, from Caitlin Lower, who works in a pub here in Weston-super-Mare.
I've recently been working in a local pub on a 0-hour contract, but I was almost guaranteed shifts from week to week. However, since the Prime Minister's advice for the public to stop visiting places like pubs, the custom has dried up and so have our shifts. I'm lucky enough to not have any bills to pay and no one to depend on me. However, there are many who I know that have children to feed and rent to pay that are going to struggle in the coming weeks. What does the government intend to do to help these people?
And I have to say, I'm getting lots of tweets in about exactly that. Now, Matt, I know you're Health Secretary and we're expecting to hear from the Chancellor tomorrow. Is that right?
Absolutely.
But what can you tell us tonight? We're live, lots of people listening, I hope, in terms of the points that Caitlin's made, that Nigel Reasons has made and that Andy's made about what's going to be coming tomorrow.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with the arguments that are being put, and we're going to deliver on that.
These statements every day are half answering things and then not fully answering.
Let me just read you. Hang on. Let me just read. No, wait a minute,
happening.
Matt. Sorry, I do want to hear from you, of course, but I also want to, in our strange, rather virtual way, hear from our audience. So Rosalind Bolton, for example, says there are millions of freelance, self-employed and sole traders who found themselves now with their entire income for many months ahead pulled. The current provisions for employees and businesses don't necessarily include them. Will aid be introduced? And then Martin Clark, I have staff I'm ready to lay off. Fabric cutters and sewing machinists. Why don't you tap into small businesses to make this personal protective equipment?
Yes.
Prevent people needing benefits, protect jobs. Tom, I can see you want to come in.
So, I mean, I'm just interested in the comparison between the scientific and health response and the economic response. It seems to me on the scientific side we have groups like SAGE, SPI-M who do the modelling. We have experts, and the response has been pretty quick, as we've talked about. But on the economic side, it seems like we've been caught a little bit on the hop and we're having to make statements and then try and fill in details afterwards. And I just wondered, I mean, OK, you've said it's a once in a century event. It's a health event as well as an economic event now. If you compare the two, do you feel that on the economic side things are a little bit lacking, or have people been caught out by it?
No, I think that the response on the economic side by the Chancellor has been unbelievably fast, considering the scale of the economic consequences of the health decisions that we've had to make. But we're just, in government, having to take the decisions of the scale that we have over the past 2 weeks has been extraordinary. And then, of course, the hard question is, how do we turn a decision at one of those podiums in Downing Street into real cash going into people's pockets?
Because you see other, hang on a second, you see other countries who are behind us in terms of number of deaths, but are doing more to help workers, like paying 75% of their wages, so that they can. They're not stuck on a very small wage, and they can
There's also
stay
the question of priorities as well. We did something this week with mortgage holidays. Now, that might benefit people, but it will also benefit landlords, when really our priority should have been renters. They should have been our kind of first priority.
Well, we've got to do all these things, Andy.
Yeah, true, Matt, but it's a question of not just pace, but who do you prioritise first? And it's that point that you were agreeing with a moment ago. Help the people who can't afford, if they don't get help, they won't be able to afford to follow the government's advice. And I think that the prioritisation has got to be a little more in tune with the level of need.
Well, the first people who we helped were people who otherwise wouldn't have got statutory sick pay. I must say, on the question itself, if you are regularly getting hours on a 0 hours contract, then you are eligible for statutory sick pay, and it's illegal not to pay it. So I just want to make that point.
Matt, let's again be honest, there are 2 million people in this country who don't earn enough to qualify for statutory sick pay. They earn less than £118, and they're currently being offered, if they do need to self-isolate or get sick, they're being offered benefits. So, you know, let's be frank about that one. But what I think we do all have to play our part. I met the Chancellor today, in fact, to discuss exactly this issue, that we know in Denmark, in Germany, in Sweden, that we've got these schemes that do put money directly into the pockets of workers.
Right, look, we've got quite a few questions to get to, so I'm just going to move on if you'll forgive me. So I'd like now to hear from, again, a person from Weston-super-Mare, Jacqueline Harris, who's an educational assessment director.
My husband and I are both in our 70s, and my husband has serious health problems. And with carers, I also look after my 94-year-old mother who has Alzheimer's. I'm continuing to collect prescriptions and food because pharmacies can no longer take on more home deliveries, and there's a 3-week wait for online supermarket deliveries. My question is, how do I balance the risks between collecting medication and food and potentially spreading the virus? And how do we ramp up capacity to meet the demands on carers, pharmacies and supermarket workers?
And let me just add to that, because we had a tweet in from John Banks. This slightly broke my heart, actually. He said, I'm over 70 years of age and classed as vulnerable. I've tried to book an online shop for my grocery to save going out. The earliest I can get is the 29th of March. How am I supposed to last 10 days with no food? So this is happening right now. I mean, Tom, do you have a view?
Yeah, well, this is happening now, and it's a desperately sad situation. I mean, I think the only positive thing, and one of the positive things that has come out of this crisis, is that we are seeing these community groups cropping up all over the place. We're seeing younger, healthy people volunteering. One of my daughters is actually saying that she's going to help people locally. So in this kind of situation, if we can put people together with those who are not at so much risk if they go and do the shopping, and younger, teenagers, younger adults are not at so much risk, that might be one way. And there's a lot of people.
Because clearly John Banks needs help.
Yeah. He needs help right now. And where is he in the country?
I can't tell you at the moment because I can't quite see from this.
No, but I mean, it's been a fantastic response in many parts of the country that people are coming together to help. But it's obviously not ideal. It's not an ideal situation. But we are in a crisis situation where we're having to use different approaches to sort problems out.
Yeah. And in terms of what Jacqueline's saying, and balancing the risk between collecting medication and food and then potentially spreading the virus.
She has to get her medicine. I mean,
clearly. And of course she does. I mean, the question is how she's wondering how to balance the risk.
Oh, it's really tough, isn't it? And you've got to feel for somebody in her position. And it's
well,
it's
lots
true.
of people are going to be in that position.
Tom said there's so much good things happening. And let's focus on the positive for a minute. There's so many great things about this country, aren't there? When you see a moment like this and people stepping forward to help. In Manchester, Gary Neville made his hotel available to the NHS last night. I mean, the country still is fantastic when you see what people are prepared to do, but more help is needed. And I think this is where somebody in my position comes in, because we can kind of create a people support system for this crisis. So the committee I mentioned before, we met yesterday. And the suggestion is now that we might ask the fire service in Greater Manchester to start ringing people in that position to say, well, what do you need? What more can be done? And we've also then launched a website to mobilise volunteers. So it's not finished yet, but we are trying to build a new support system where we're using all of the capacity that we've got. And the Royal Mail in part of Greater Manchester offered to do some home deliveries of items. So it's coming together. I think we can't just leave it all to be spontaneous and groups doing this and that. Yeah. We're trying to create a structure through which it can all happen. And I hope next week we should be able to have that beginning to work.
OK, let's take one more question from Sam Cotto, who, again, is from Weston-super-Mare and is an A-level student.
Hi, my name is Sam. I'm an A-level student at Weston College, and my question is, given the cancellation of GCSEs and A-levels this year, what is the fairest alternative for the students that have worked so hard for 2 years? is it the case that this year group will be the one written off by universities and future employers?
So Francis, I'm sure you've been talking to head teachers and all sorts about this. What's the view? Where are we heading?
Yeah, well, first of all, my heart breaks for him, and anybody who's had kids that age going through exams knows just how that feels. So, you know, I think it is really important, and I'm sure the government will be on this, that we provide some, you know, real reassurance to that generation of young people that, you know,
are you getting any sense of how teachers, what they would like?
Yeah, I can tell you they are desperate for really clear guidance.
Let me just relay a tweet that's just come in from Kevin Hooper. When will pupils find out about how GCSE and A-levels are going to be awarded? He then goes on to say, today has been one of the hardest days I've ever known as a teacher, saying goodbye to these pupils without being able to answer their questions. Tom?
Yeah, it must be very difficult for them. I've got a teenage daughter who is in that exact situation. She found out yesterday her GCSEs have been cancelled on a background of a couple of weeks of increasing anxiety and increasing numbers of kids not going to school and parents worrying. In fact, I've been doing Twitter polls to try and gauge the public opinion on some of these issues about where they stand compared to what the official advice is. And I think although the scientific advice has been we don't need to close the schools yet in terms of controlling the outbreak, it's become clear that it increasingly was going to be difficult to continue with this situation. I think to try and answer the question from Sam about what's the fairest way, I mean, clearly, when I did, well, they were called O-levels back then.
I remember those. There's quite a few of us on this panel remember those, yeah.
When you did all your work and then everything was assessed right at the end with the exam. But in the intervening years, there has been times when a lot of the assessments are done through looking at coursework and through other assessments. So there is some experience, at least in the community, of how to look at school children's coursework and then make an assessment about their grades overall. So it is going to be a time of anxiety for them, mixed also with great rejoicing. I think some of them are in two minds.
Maybe some of the, yes,
hopefully there will
mixed
be
feelings, perhaps.
Clarity and resolution in the next few weeks.
I mean, as I understand it, we're going to hear tomorrow. Is that right? Exactly what's going to be happening with the GCSEs and A-levels and how children are going to be able to proceed?
Well, and this question of the key workers as well, exactly how that's defined. Again, I've been working on that today.
And is there anything you can tell us about that?
Well, for instance, it will include not only NHS staff, but also social care and those who are working on the supply of medical devices, like the sort of masks that we were talking about
what
at the top of the
people
programme.
who work in supermarkets, for example?
Well, the list will be published tomorrow.
Angela?
Yeah, I mean, you feel for all these people that have studied and worked so hard, and we hope that they get a full decision about what will happen with their exams. And as you said, Francis, you know, I've got friends who are teachers and they've got children now off school, and I think it's going to be challenging in many fronts, actually, lots of children off school.
I mean, the thing about exams as well is they weren't always that fair, were they? On one day, you go in a room and you have to... So, in some ways, this could be a fair process for them, actually.
I think also the universities will be sympathetic. I'm at the University of Liverpool. There's been a lot of thinking about both looking after our current students, who are now all working remotely, not missing any lessons, it's all happening online, but also how we will look after future students and make sure they have fair access. As you've said, this will be the COVID generation.
There's one further really important point to make, which is that when the kids are off school, they mustn't go and stay with their grandparents if they're over 70, because that would be counterproductive. So the kids have got to stay with people who are
who's going to look
under
after
those
them?
kids stay in school, though, who
Well,
only have grandparents as an option. They should probably...
I think that is quite an important point and perhaps slightly surprising. I think schools, clearly something had to change. And there's this now big decision you're having to make over what are key workers. You know, an alternative approach would have been to say school is no longer compulsory in this country and parents can decide what the needs are, their own needs and the needs of the children. And then you would avoid this really difficult decision about what's a key worker, because most workers are key in some way. And then those who could look after their own kids, because between the parents they can work it out who can stay at home. that would work. Those where the grandparents are the only option and we don't want them staying with grandparents, they could then be put into school, and it would be a much smaller number than it is now. It could be judged according to the number of teachers. You've got a lot more space in school because not everybody's there. So, you know, it would have been, potentially, it would have been an alternative approach.
Well, we will hear tomorrow. I know there's a limit to how much you want to tell us. Our hour is up, I'm afraid, I have to say. It's been an interesting way of doing the programme. I'm pleased to say Question Time will be back. Yes, it's been rather quiet in some senses. I have to say I have missed you, audience, not having you here. I'm pleased to say that we will be back next week and for the foreseeable future, live at 8 o'clock on Thursday nights. So if you want to be part of our virtual audience, as we are doing it at the moment, do go to the Question Time website and apply in the usual way. And if you want to have your say on what we've been discussing this evening, you can join Adrian, Charles and guests on Question Time Extra Time. As always, that's on 5 Live now. And you can also listen to the Coronavirus podcast on BBC Sounds. But thank you very much to the panel for coming tonight, and to everyone who recorded a question or got in touch during the programme. From Weston-super-Mare, bye-bye.
Coming up, it's the Midsummer Festival, but can chaos be averted for the Noughts and Crosses? Next.